Hello everyone and welcome back to the GeekWave. This is the low budget show. It's the show so low. It has no budget. We're back into the Cowabunga summer. We're nearing the end. I say that. We're picking up into the next month. This is coming out the last day of July. And with that, we are headed into the August of the Cowabunga summer. I am a day away at the time of this recording from seeing Mutant Mayhem. I am super excited about that movie. I cannot wait to see what's going to be coming from that. And I guess we could kind of talk about that. I do want to talk about that a little bit more in another video. The fact that Paramount was like, hey, we have faith in this. It's going to be getting a sequel and a 2-season streaming show with the, I hope it's the same budget, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was less than. I wonder if this art style is obtainable on television for a long format. But then again, is streaming really television? What is anything? The world sucks right now. Support just like the talented people that make the stuff you like, you know? Again, I talked about it last time we did this GeekWave stuff. I took a week off because I was like, yeah, I got nothing to talk about, and I'm just not vibing with like this stuff, and I'm still kind of iffy on it. I just kind of want to get back into talking about the Turtles, so we're not going to dive too much into the news of the week and all that stuff. It's a lot, it's complicated, it's messy, and the WGA SAG after strike, I support all of that. Knock it down. We're seeing the real heroes of the industry, the real villains of the industry, and I think a year from now, 2 years from now, when I think everything's like fully resolved and everything's just like clean and clear, we're going to be seeing a huge shift in this industry. With this excessive Barbenheimer too, I feel like that's going to change a lot of stuff for better or worse. But as it stands, there's just nothing really to like sink your teeth into to get like really excited about, you know? Everything's in flux. Movies are moving all the time. Shows are going to be canceled. Nothing is good. Studios are terrible. And it's just hard to want to just like talk about news. And even so, it's not like anything major has been announced recently, you know? Comic-Con was the other weekend. They canceled major panels. It's just like, let's just move on, you know? And that's good. I think we should just leave that kind of stuff out of the conversation. Now, there's a couple of things I guess we'll talk about just solely because it's worth mentioning, and they're kind of tragic to start off. There's been a few big deaths recently. The day of this recording, actually, there's 2 major ones we'll talk about. But first off, Sinead O'Connor passed away recently. She was a controversial figure for all the wrong reasons because she spoke out adamantly in like a place where people didn't want her to speak out. She was a beautiful musician, a very talented woman, and she will be missed. That sucks a lot. And I think it was like very recently that her son passed away too, so that's even more tragic. And on that note too, there was a couple of deaths this morning that is kind of terrifying to think about. The first one is Paul Reubens, best known as Pee Wee Herman. I look, it's not my generation. It's not. I think it's Pee Wee Herman. Yeah, okay. Paul Reubens. Again, it's not my generation. I am aware of the cultural and impact on comedy and creativity it's had for the future. And I know that Paul Reubens was just like a genuinely interesting and pleasant guy. So this is just like a hard blow and something that's terrifying to think about. That sucks. He had a private battle that he didn't like publicly state, which is kind of, you know, that's okay. And they did release a statement. He did release a statement to the public, like, thank you for letting me do this in private. I appreciate all of you. And that's just kind of amazing to think about that he was able to do that. And he was a comedic genius on a level unparalleled and deserves the best. So rest in peace to Paul Reubens. And Pee-wee inspired probably more of your favorite comics than you imagine. I don't think we have like specific types of humor today without like the success of that show. You know, it was kind of like around the time of Elvira, and Elvira is one of my favorite characters, and they were friends, like Cassandra and Paul were friends, so I'm just thinking, like, you know, that era of, like, that kind of, like, lower budgeted comedy that's more, like, cable-ish, that's very impactful, but when you think the day couldn't get worse, star of Euphoria, Angus Cloud, also passed away. He was 25, And like that is way too young. And that is disheartening if there ever was one. Whatever you are dealing with personally, seek help, look for help, find the help you need. This is not a battle you have to fight alone. And that is crazy. It's disheartening on a whole other level. The career and future that this man could have had is unknown, but it could have been something phenomenal. And that's just sad. It's terrifying. And I think there was a statement that came out with him too that like a week or two earlier, he buried his father, and that kind of put him in a very complicated headspace. But my God, that is tragic and sad. And I don't want this to be solely talking about the negativity and the death of the world. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about something a little more positive. So the Ninja Turtles, yeah, let's talk about them for a minute. Let's talk about a very specific iteration that almost feels like a lost relic of the era. Because even like just recently, the CG series from 2012 when Rise of the TMNT, popular to a younger demographic. It's weird to think that people grew up watching those ones and are now like mature people. And then you just have like the nostalgia bait of the 90s movies and the 80s cartoon and stuff. And then right in the middle of those two very prominent eras of Turtles and just content in general, you have this piece from 2003 that is the era I grew up watching, which it's kind of fun that like I have like my own generation of Turtle that is, different than everybody else, that's kind of like not lost media, but it's not like the one people go back to and talk about. It's not even like one where like clips float around on like TikTok and stuff where people like screenshot or like make memes out of it. People do like fan edits for Rise, and they do fan edits for like the CG stuff, and there'll be like a joke from the 80s cartoon. But this era, it just doesn't get that love. And I think that's just weird to consider, like why? It's a good era. And I think it just has to do with like, at that time period, everything was like emulating what came before it, and it just kind of like existed as it's definitely an homage kind of to Batman the Animated Series, where like that's the tone it's going for, kind of inspired by everything that came before it in terms of like the comics and continuity, but solely in its own world. I just don't think like the pacing or the flow of the show really speaks to like kids today. So maybe that's why it's not nostalgic for it. And then at the time when this came out, the people that watched the 80s and 90s stuff had grown up. Like they were like in college, and it's like, I can't watch a Ninja Turtle cartoon. That'd be silly of me. So then you're just stuck with like the kids like me who were born in the late 90s who just, had like I was born a little bit after that like surge of Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network originals, and then you're just like, yeah, okay, so that stuff's kind of before me. I've seen it all in like contemporary viewing and stuff, but it's hard to really say like the most prominent things of the era, I guess, for me would be like SpongeBob and Fairly Odd Parents and that kind of thing. But then this show, it airs when I'm a young boy, and I just remember my fascination with the Turtles started when I just saw like a specific scene from the 90s movie on a TV in my house one day, and I was like, that is something I've never seen before. What is this? Why do I like it so much? And then from there, like I learned that there was like a TV show that I can watch right now that has those characters in it, and it's on every week, and they do a bunch of crazy stuff, and I'm like, this is awesome. And I don't know if it's the best iteration of the Turtles or like the best show. You'd have to really think about that, but for my money, this is one that I don't think we'd see the likes of again. I think it's the perfect blend of every single like format that the Turtles experience in animation. It is kind of comedic. Like it doesn't take itself seriously. It knows when to have fun and be silly, but it can also be very serious, and it is very stylized. It has a very kind of just like samurai aesthetic, very like Japanese inspired in terms of like the film movements, and we do a lot of just like, interesting movements with like the sidebars with like the black panels on the screen, and all of that is very, very interesting. It gives it a very specific feel that's kind of comic booky, just kind of like old school inspired and stuff like that. And it definitely is just like the type of show we'd make in the early 2000s, where everything's kind of like a weird laser and like everything's crystallized and it's kind of like magical but futuristic science fiction-y magical, and it's all just kind of like everything happening but nothing's really happening, and we take a lot of interesting interpretations, and then the show just kind of like falls down, like it collapses in on itself after like the fifth season, and then they go to the future and then they come back and do computer stuff, and it's like, what just happened? Why did that happen? Again, it's just so much of that era, and I just think, not that like there's so much lost media of that era, but in that time frame of like the 2000s, people like emulate like the stuff from Nickelodeon, and they emulate the stuff from Cartoon Network. They don't really consider the other stuff, because this was part, if I'm not mistaken, this was like from Fox Kids, which was like its own weird thing that they tried to push, and it never really worked. So it was from like 4Kids Entertainment, which was a division of Fox, I think. They really don't use it now. It's kind of like it stopped because it went bankrupt in 2017. And they kind of worked on, what did they work on? I wonder if we could find it here. I'm just kind of browsing their Wikipedia to see if anything comes up. But they worked on like Yu-Gi-Oh! I think was one of like their big ones, because they did a lot of like, the animation stuff. And Sonic, they had like a Sonic X. I think they did that one. And they did a Pokemon series, if I'm not mistaken. Just kind of that aesthetic and that vibe, which was like, it's different enough where they stand out from the audience because it's a little more anime inspired. But it's also like not the biggest thing in the world, And that happens. Like, they just didn't win everything. And the fate of all these like entertainment industries is like they fall flat. So it started on Fox, and then I think for the last season it shifted to something else, which sucked, and that was pretty bad too. And then they had like the big finale, but we'll get to that in another video. This era was just, it was just so of its time, and just like clearly ripping off the animated series of Batman, clearly trying to be serious and goofy, and other iterations just lean into it more and do different things. Like it's so much of the comic book. It's just so much of, this is a robotic guy doing a weird thing, and then it just leads to all this stuff. And I think like one of the big things that it did was just that like the space Utrom stuff was just so heavily in this show, and that kind of, I guess, is something that hasn't really happened since then. And that's kind of like the early stuff too. It's very street level, and then it gets to the Utrom stuff, and then it gets to the space stuff with the Triceraton and all that. And then it kind of like comes back down and relaxes for a minute. It's like, here's some more mutants and stuff happening, doop-de-doop. But then it's very like mystical and old school and like the feudal stuff, and it covers everything, which is just like what all these shit, they all do it. Like every one of these cartoons does it. I think this is just like one that existed when I was young, and I just have the nostalgia for it. But I just genuinely think, even on like a rewatch now, it's doing things we don't see a lot of anymore. Just very specific action. It's very fluid. The jokes are just of the time. It's really interesting. And it has one of my favorite episodes of any Ninja Turtle thing, and I want to talk about it specifically now, just because I love it, So it has an episode that's just a love letter to Jack Kirby, and I think that's fantastic. Like they did an episode in the first season. What episode was it specifically? 10 maybe? They had like a huge thing, and the turtles have to stay with April for a minute, and there's like a guy that lives in April's basement, and he's kind of just like, this old cartoonist guy. His name's Kirby King, and he finds a magical crystal that makes the things he draws come to life, and the entire thing is just a love letter to Jack Kirby. And it's just so sweet. And it's just Donatello, my favorite turtle, hanging out with this guy. And it's just like, look at this dude who makes these beautiful creative projects, and they come to life. And They just sweep you off your feet, and it's just something you don't see. Ah, I love it. It's just so fun and different. Yeah, I mean, I can't believe they did that. I really can't believe they, like, in this cartoon, years after Kirby died, like 9 years after Kirby died and he died in 94, they're like, no, he was an influence both on the Turtles and just in general. Because I think in the Mirage comic, this was like a storyline they did too, if I'm not mistaken. Because that would, yeah, right, yeah, I think it was, and it's just so cool. Like, I love that stuff, and it's just so fun to me. And let's actually like get into like the things that this show does that I think are very interesting. First off, it does start off very street level, which is kind of important, and it introduces you to the larger world, which is very cool. It handles everything perfectly. It's again very 2000s, but the way it presents these characters works really well. It allows them all to be funny, but funny in like their different ways, and I appreciate that. Like Mikey is very much just kind of like that chill guy. He if he was a human, he'd probably have like the white platinum hair with like the frosted tips, and he'd wear like a flame t-shirt that has like black and the orange flames coming up, just like that kind of guy. Like a pseudo 2000s punk. And Raph would definitely be like the leather jacket type of guy, maybe with a mohawk, just like the aggressive like brawler of Brooklyn and that kind of thing. And it's just very fun. Like they just have the energy of that era, and being a part of that era like I was, and I know a couple people else who are part of that. Something to explore. It's something really fun. And I think sometimes we fail to like make the characters like a part of the era they are in. I don't think the 2012 cartoon really felt like the Turtles were of the 2012. I think Rise worked and the 90s movie did that. Everything else just didn't really encapsulate like the era they were a part of. I don't even think the 80s one did it, but this one, it was just kind of like dark, and they fought the Foot Clan, and they actually got to use their weapons. And everybody got to like make jokes, and they had like fun episodes where they'd be like chasing a fake Bigfoot or something. And when they went to like space, they like started a revolution and stuff. It got very serious and cool. And it is probably is it my favorite iteration of every one of these characters? Let's think about them all for a minute. I think it is a really good depiction of Leonardo taking the reins of a leader and letting his brothers like explore things. He gets some very interesting arcs in the show. I really like the episode where he has to fight the ultimate ninja, and you're just like, this guy just hates you for no reason. Or when he thinks he can work with the Shredder, and it's just like, this is a lie, everything is bullshit. And then I do also like the stuff with Leo in like the Nexus battle stuff. Like, that's really fun too. This, of course, this is my favorite Donatello. This is the Donatello I grew up with, and Donatello being my favorite turtle. This is what I want to see from him. Like, he is very capable. He builds stuff that is like realistic to like the things they have in the sewer. Sometimes I don't like when the technology gets crazy. It does get crazy here. Like, where would he have the parts to make a submarine? But like the van made out of like a garbage truck is very interesting, and like the motorcycles work really well. But like, why would he have the submarine? That's a cool episode too. I do like that one a lot, but it's just kind of cool. And he's like a realistic genius in terms to like everyone else he meets in the world, like compared to Stockman and compared to Leatherhead and compared to Fugitoid. Like, his genius holds up well, and they give him a lot to do. And something that I just appreciate, and you see it in like different iterations of like the creators, is the respect for Donatello. Some of them have it, some of them don't. They focus on the other stuff. You can get like the hot-headed energy out with Raph really quick. This is a great Raph too. If there's one I would say is probably not the best iteration, I don't know if this is my favorite Raph. It's a really good Raph because he is realistically angry, and he's allowed to be like pissed off at the stuff that his brothers get into, and that's kind of impressive to see. But I also don't know if it's my favorite Michelangelo, but it's just like a really good showing for that character. And there's specific episodes where you get to see him like grow up and learn something. It is definitely like of the era where he's going to idolize superheroes because they were like popular when he was a kid in the 90s. So when you have the characters like the Silver Sentry and he becomes the Turtle Titan, that's all great. It's all really cool. I love the concept of it's the thing. Like, I talked about this when we talked about TMNT, the 2007 cartoon movie. I love the idea of Raphael becoming the vigilante. It doesn't matter what they're doing, he's going to be the vigilante. I love the same thing for that with Michelangelo becoming the hero. I think he emulates and wants to be the superhero more than his brothers do. And not even like, like an arrogant way where he wants to be like seen and loved by the world. He just thinks like there's good to be done and he wants to do that. And the Turtle Titan best represents what he is capable of. I think that's such a cool use of that character and it's so fun. Easily the best depiction of Casey Jones in any media because it's the perfect level of himbo. He's not sexist and weird. He's just a little stupid and doesn't get everything right the first time. Great use of that character. Absolutely love it. A great April O'Neil where you kind of get the best of both worlds where she is part of the scientific stuff. She is kind of part of like the antique shop. She does pretend to be a reporter, which is funny. It's funny, I guess. It's fine. And it works well. And easily one of the best Splinters because this Splinter feels like a wise old man. It's the origin where he was a rat. And every time he comes into a fight, you feel the effects that this is a tough battle. And he is going to kick ass and take names. I love the way they use him. I love the use that, like, again, if like the Nexus, there's so many just like great standalone stories, like the Battle Nexus stuff. Let's talk about that for a minute. I remember when I was a young boy, that arc blew my mind because I'm like, are you telling me Splinter won a championship against the best fighters in the world? And now he just shows up here and the Daimyo's like, yeah, you're cool, dude. You gonna win again? And then the Turtles enter the fight and like, that changed my life, I think, when I was a kid. Like, yeah, I loved the stuff when they went to space. And yeah, I just like the stuff where they're fighting the Shredder and they're doing all that stuff. Being a Leatherhead fan, I just love seeing when Leatherhead showed up, but it was crazy cool when they did the Battle Nexus tournament. And because we got Usagi Yojimbo show up in there, and that was really fun. That was my introduction to Usagi. I've obviously seen more from him after that, but having him appear there was really cool. I just like the idea that, like, the Turtles have to, like, fight each other, and then Michelangelo might have to fight Master Splinter, but he like, surrenders the fight to Mikey so he can win. And it's like great, and then Michelangelo wins like the turn. That's so cool. And Leo's poisoned because the Ultimate Ninja is pissed off, and there's like a dragon, and they merge into one being. Oh, that's such a cool thing. What a really fun concept. And that's the other stuff from like that is so much of the era. Same with like the like Lost City people that were like transported by like crystals. Like that is so specific. What a weird thing that show also did. But we have to talk about probably like the biggest change, There's no like antagonists that are always mutants, right? There's no Bebop and Rocksteady from the fight every week. Later on, they'll fight a little more mutants. It's not like the mutant heavy show. They are clearly the main mutants. Eventually, a couple of them will appear here and there, but the biggest change is the use of the Shredder, which I understand. I think this Shredder is a very, very curious portrayal. Looking back on it, I do appreciate it for being different. It is combining the characters of Krang and Shredder into one being, where Shredder is actually an Utrom who's existed since feudal Japan and has taken over the Foot Clan and made it into his own thing. And I just kind of like that they hold on to that idea. Like they never just like back away from it or try to change it in any capacity. They're just solely like, yeah, that is the idea we came up with. If we try to change that now, what's the point of any of it? Like, he's like a red Utrom. He's got like a slash. It's like a scar and it's purple over an eye. And he's a formidable foe who has had years to train and become the legend he is today. And it's pretty sick. I do like it. Again, it's a very specific iteration that might make some fans be like, what are we doing here? But even as a kid, I was like, okay, I'm here to see what this is going to be. And it was something fun. I liked that. It's such a good design. Like, the actual costuming for Shredder, too. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but it's just fierce. The red eyes, the intensity every time he shows up. They really used him well because he wasn't like a main antagonist every single week or every single season. He showed up very sparingly, and that made him formidable. And even when Karai showed up, it definitely just changed things to be better. It was very impressive how they used her, too. I do appreciate that. It looked really strong. And, we don't do that much anymore. It's all about the Shredder. In this new iteration, I'm kind of glad it's not about the Shredder, but, who's to say what's actually going to happen? You never know. Good stuff, man. It's all good stuff. I'm looking at the list of the seasons here. So the first season's the Mouser stuff. It's the Shredder first attacks. They find the underground people. It's kind of weird. Then the second season, they go to space. That's all great. They find what's-his-face, Leatherhead. They do the big battle. It's kind of fun. Space invaders come back. The worlds collide in the third season. It's you're starting to be like, oh yeah, okay, we're doing some interesting stuff here. That's kind of crazy. Do you remember like the arc where like the turtles got lost in time? They all went to like different time periods, and Donatello went to a future where like his brothers were like disbanded, and Leonardo became like Blade, and Michelangelo like lost an arm. That as a kid, that messed me up. I'm like, that is insane, and it's cool, and I love it, and I'm here for it. And then it kind of like, not that it starts to unravel, but you can feel the gears turning as we kind of move away to just more standalone stuff, and it gets a little more like Outbacky, and they get like, those weird powers that show up for a minute. Do you remember when they got like those weird glowing powers, and you're like, what are we doing here? Why do we need these glowing shit? It's not going to save anybody. It's not going to make anything better. And like the first two seasons though, like they're unparalleled. And even the third one, I guess, is like very strong and does some really interesting stuff. It's a good Baxter too. I think he just gets like more redundant the more he shows up and does stuff. But I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the era that kind of just, I don't know, went different for some reason. So season 6, we have an ending for season 5, and we're like, okay, cool, that's fine. Like they did like the wandering in the desert kind of stuff. They learned the past about like all this history, and you're like, that's fine, I guess. Like the 5th season was shorter, and it wasn't as like well received. And you're like, oh, okay, that's fine. But there's still a season 6. Like, what's that gonna look like? Well, season 6 is what if they went to the future? Future shell shock. Fast forward. I remember being a young boy, and this was where I exited the show. I'm like, okay, yeah. I mean, okay. An entire season where the turtles went to, was it like 100 years in the future or 1,000 or some shit? They went too far into the future, and because of that, they met Casey and April's great-great-grandson, Cody Jones, and he had like a robot butler, and the turtles had to wear like these stupid costumes, and their dad showed up, so Splinter was there too. And you're just like, okay, it was 100 years, right? And then they just like, we just did shit, I don't even think it's that iconic. It's an idea. I get it, where it's like, yeah, the future's kind of cool. Batman Beyond was exciting. But the thing with that is, like, we introduced, like, another character, in Terry McGinnis. So I don't think we're going to be, like, doing the same vibe with the Turtles in that capacity. And we didn't. There's not much to, like, really latch onto. You remember, like, the, like, evil mutated other turtles that became like their clones. You remember the episode where like Cody explained like the history, like what happens if they like went back and how they like caused destruction in the world and that kind of shit. And it sucked. I was like, yeah, this is, and at that point too, I am becoming an older boy. I'm going to be like, 8, 9, 10, around that era. And I'm like, I'm all about the cool stuff now, which was the 2007 cartoon movie, because I'm like, yeah, this is interesting. And I just faded out. And I didn't see Back to the Sewer when it first came out. I didn't. I didn't care. I just remember like, yeah, I mean, they're going to be back. And the thing about Back to the Sewer, they changed way too much to make it interesting. So the designs are terrible. They have pupils now, and it does not look good. April has way too big of an anime face, and we shifted networks, and it became like cyberspace where we went to like a computer and we'd fight like a cyberverse shredder, and then just kind of ends when April and Casey get married, and you're like, what? What happened? Where's like the fun? And it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun. We don't like it. We never liked it. And then there was like a made-for-TV movie that was split into 4 parts, but we're going to talk about that later because it's interesting and we need to describe that and talk about it in detail in another video. It's just bad, you know? Like, it's just so uninteresting what happened to that show and where it went, because it could have been like remembered for something that's really strong, and it had like a great couple of first seasons, and then slowly it was just like the Ninja Tribunal stuff. You're like, that's I mean, that's fine because at least that's fitting for the characters. And then it's just like, but what if they went to the future though? And you're like, I mean, if you want, I don't know why you would, but sure. And then back to the sewers. What if they all had pupils and it looked stupid and nobody was happy with it? And it essentially like destroyed these characters for a while. I mean, I say a while. It wasn't like that long because the other show came back like 3 years later in a whole rebooted style. But this era, it was very strong. It fell short quick. The concepts were both comedic and dramatic and comic booky and emulated the old cartoon. And the voice acting was really good. Like, those are the voices I read most of the characters in now. They are that strong and interesting. And it's just one of those things that worked so well. It's a shame how fast it lost its footing and just didn't work. You know, you just look at some of these images of like their stupid costumes in the cyberspace. You're like, what are we doing? Why did this happen? Why are we like this? Why can't we just go back to like an era where they're just like playing ice hockey, you know? Casey's showing them like a brutal form of hockey. And I'm like, why would that be a thing? Oh, because Casey is a himbo and he likes brutal man sports, but he got April in the end. It's very weird. But it worked. I don't know. It was fine, I guess. Got the job done as much as it needed to. It was a very weird era for the Turtles, but you know what? I still hold nostalgia for it. I just remember like those intense emotional episodes where it's like, here's a dramatic future, here's one of the characters being hurt, who knows what's going to happen in like this Battle Nexus tournament or with like the Triceraton War. And even as a kid, I was like, this is intense and it's gripping and it's got me intrigued. And I still think the design is very 2000s and like that type of aesthetic, but there was clearly money behind it. And we tried something and it worked, but there's so much other Turtle stuff that it gets lost in the shuffle for good reason, because it lost its footing. And that happens to the best of them. Again, I can't say it's the best iteration, but it's a ferocious shredder. It's a very powerful splinter. It goes in places you're not expecting. The new things it tries to do with like weird garbage people and nanotech, very 2000s, but sometimes that's worth it. You see that kind of stuff happening today, so I'm not upset by it. It's just very compelling and very curious that it's what we're doing now. So that's kind of fun and interesting. It is a very good era. I do really like the episodes where they had to like go back in time. I think that's just really cool, you know? Like they tried something there. I can't complain about that. Everything is fun. Everything is fun. Everything is cool. And we should be proud of content existing forever. You know? Let's always do something. Let's always make a thing. Yeah. Yeah, let's do it. Stuff forever. Never give up. No, it's good. It is good. It's very strong. And I like it. And maybe it's not the best, but I hold a lot of nostalgia for this era, and I think there's something about it that's very compelling. Maybe just because it's what got me into this. But I do think it had a really incredible toy line that's kind of underrated. You don't see it a lot in the wild anymore. They had a couple of really good video games that led up to this like whole universe, and that was really fun. I do like it. There's something about this. We are kind of reaching that era now where like my generation can feel like that nostalgia because we're going on 20 years since the first episode or the first season. And that's kind of cool to think about. Like, we've actually reached that point in history where now I can look back on this and have it be like the thing I can hold on to, and like it's my era, it's my concept. I think that's kind of fun. I like all the other I like all the other cartoons as well. Don't get me wrong, but this one, for better or worse, it's my era. It's my generations, and that's really cool. I like that I can have that. There's some, shows and IPs where it's just then and now. But the fact that this whole like intellectual property has existed for so long and so many iterations, it's cool that there's one just specifically for me. And that's kind of exciting. It makes me happy, at least. I dig that. And hey, it's on Paramount Plus. You can watch this all on Paramount Plus, including the movie we're going to be talking about in the next Galactic Tales. So, hey, thank you all for watching this episode of the GeekWave. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and X, which is Twitter, but I don't know. I don't know how long I'm going to be doing that for. We'll find out. I do want to call it Twitter. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck, Cowabunga dudes. And let's get excited. Mutant Mayhem is very soon. It's going to be really fun. Let's check it out.